Hi, and welcome to Mrs. Pam Reads. We are continuing in the Magic Circle by Katherine Neville. In our last video, no, there it is. I thought I lost my place. In our last video, Ariel had just finished dinner with her dad and stepmom after the funeral of her sort of brother. It's actually her cousin, her uncle's son, that they grew up together. So she also discovered she is likely to inherit all of his millions of dollars. And she almost got into a car accident on a snow-covered road. She's arrived home to see that her driveway is all snowed in, and she's just sitting in the car. And that's where we stopped. In 1989, so historical fiction back and forth in time, currently 1989. I shook my head and tried to snap out of it. I heard the phone ringing in my apartment below. The lights were off in the main house, suggesting that my eccentric, if adorable, Mormon landlord had gone off to the mountains to catch the fresh powder for tomorrow's skiing, or perhaps over to the temple to pray for the driveway to clear itself. Much as I hated mucking about in deep powder, I understood the only way to traverse the steep gap between the house and the car was to ski. Luckily, my lightweight cross-country boots and skis were in the back of my hatchback with the other survival gear. Now, if I could only manage to follow the line where the driveway should be, our yawning chasm of a front lawn, nearly invisible beneath the drifts by now, might seem as bottomless and lethal as quicksand if I fell into it. As also, I'd have to abandon my car up here on the road for the night, where it would vanish too if the snow plows came through at dawn before I could rescue it. I got out and yanked the skis from the back of the car, as well as my duffel bag and a few belongings. I thought I could carry over my shoulder and set them out on the flat road. I had slipped in back to rummage for my boots when, through the side window, I saw my mailbox, identified by the little flag rising like a gay beacon from the drift, and suddenly recalled I'd forgotten to stop my mail when I'd left so hastily for the funeral. Slamming the back car door shut and hanging on to its handle for balance, I swept the mound of snow off the box and extracted the mail that must have been building all week. It was more than I'd imagined, so with my other hand, I let go the door handle and reached for the duffel bag, unintentionally stepping slightly away from the car. With that first step, I sank into snow up to my waist, and I kept on sinking. I felt the fear clutching at me as I struggled to keep from panicking. I knew that thrashing about would only make me sink faster. I'd lived in these parts long enough to hear of many folks who'd been smothered, sinking into bottomless snow where they couldn't move arms or legs to free themselves. And the second I started to sink, it also occurred to me that I'd departed for the funeral with little fanfare, only telling my boss there'd been a death in the family and leaving a cryptic note for my landlord. It was entirely possible, even though my car would be found, that no one would find me until after the spring melt. I tossed the disabling pile of mail up onto the road under the car so it wouldn't sink into the drifts and vanish too. I managed to get one elbow propped on the solid surface, clawing with my other hand until I could twist enough to get both arms flat on the road. When I pushed myself up, it felt like vaulting from a swimming pool with a 50-pound weight on my legs. It wrung out every ounce of energy I had. I lay flat on my stomach on the road, shaking with hot, fear, and exhaustion. It didn't last long. Soon, the chills set in as the clinging ice from my full body dip in that snowbank saturated my inadequately waterproofed clothes. Whew, that was a mouthful. I staggered to my feet and yanked the car door open. Cold, soaked, thoroughly wiped out, I was furious with myself. Wasn't Jack London's To Build a Fire required reading for mountain children about a chap who goes out into the tundra at 60 below against all advice? He freezes to death very slowly, not what I had on my agenda. I pulled the cross-country boots from the car, laced them with stiff fingers in soggy gloves, snapped on my long featherweight Nordic skis, stuffed the bundle of mail in the duffel, slung it over my shoulder, and slalomed down to the back door. Why hadn't I tried that as my first idea and bypassed Mr. Postman until morning? The phone was again ringing as I shed my skis, threw open the door, and half tumbled along with a mess of powder down the steep stairway to my cozy dungeon fortress. At least it had been cozy when I left it a week ago. I flicked on the lights and saw ice caking inside the windows and patterns of crystal formed on the mirrors and picture glass like something out of Dr. Zhivago. Softly cursing my landlord, who turned down my heat to spare expense whenever I left the building, I yanked off the dripping boots before I stepped onto the Orientals, raced across the open, book-lined living room, and made a dive into pillows to grab the phone on the floor. I kicked myself at once for picking it up. It was Augustus, her dad. "Why did you leave?" were the first words out of his mouth. "Grace and I have been nearly at our wits' end trying to find you. Where have you been?" "Having fun, playing in the snow," I told him, rolling over on my back in the pillows and cradling the phone to my ear. "I thought the party was over. Were there other treats in store?" I unbuttoned my wet trousers and tried to wriggle out of them so I wouldn't get pneumonia down here in this bitterly cold dungeon, or more likely, develop mold. I could see my breath in the air. "Your sense of humor has always seemed to me ill-placed at best," Augustus informed me coolly. "Or perhaps only your sense of timing. When you vanished just after the reading of the will, we phoned your hotel and were told you had checked out earlier that same morning. But once we'd heard the will, of course, Grace and I had agreed to a press conference." "A press conference?" I said, sitting bolt upright in astonishment. I tried to keep the phone to my ear as I yanked myself out of my wet parka and pulled off my sweater, but I only caught Augustus's last words. "Must be yours as well." "What must be mine?" I asked, rubbing my hands hard over my goosebumpy body, stood up and dragged the phone over to the fireplace. I was tucking pine cones and paper under the pile of logs already stacked as Augustus replied. "The manuscripts, naturally. Everyone knew Sam had inherited them. How very valuable they must be. But after Ernest's death, no one could locate Sam. He seemed to have been swallowed up. When I tried to discuss it during dinner after the funeral, you seemed to want to avoid the issue. But now that it's known you're not only Sam's principal heir, but his sole heir, naturally, matters have changed." "Naturally?" I said with impatience as I lit a match under the kindling and watched with relief as the flames leapt up at once. "I have no idea what manuscripts you're talking about." And stranger still, I thought, regardless of what they might be worth, why on earth would someone with my father's predilection for privacy ever dream of agreeing to a press conference? It was more than suspicious. "You mean you don't know of them?" Augustus was saying in an odd voice. How can that be when the Washington Post and the London Times and the International Herald Tribune were all here? Of course, there was nothing we could say since the manuscripts were not in the hands of the executor and you vanished as well. Maybe you could clue me in before I freeze to death, I said between chattering teeth. What are these manuscripts Sam left me? No, let me guess. Francis Bacon's letters to Ben Jonson, admitting that Bacon really did it, as we've always suspected, write all Shakespeare's plays. To my surprise, Augustus didn't miss a beat. They're worth a good deal more than that, he informed me, and my father was a man who understood the meanings of words like worth and value. The very moment you learn anything about them, as I've no doubt you will, he went on, you must notify me or our attorneys at once. I don't think you quite appreciate the position you are in. Okay, I thought. I'll give this one more try. I took a deep breath. No, I suppose not, I agreed. Could you see your way to share with me, Father, what the whole world seems to already know? What are these manuscripts? Pandora's, Augustus said curtly, the name sounding bitter as acid in his mouth, as well it might be. Pandora was my grandmother, my father's loving mother, who'd abandoned him at birth. Though I'd never met her, by all accounts, she'd been the most colorful, flamboyant, and outrageous of all the Ben women. And with our family tree, that was going some. Pandora had manuscripts? I asked my father. What kind? Oh, diaries, letters, correspondence with the great and near great, that sort of thing, he said in a dismissive tone. Then, casually, he added, it's possible she might even have written a memoir of sorts. I might not see eye to eye with my father on most things, but I knew him well enough to know when he was pulling my chain. He must have been calling here every 15 minutes for the past 2 days. That's why I'd heard the phone ring twice during my brief time outside. If he was in such a panic to reach me, and this stuff was so hot that he had to give in to a press conference, why was he playing footsie with me now? Why all the belated interest, I asked. I mean, Granny dearest has been dead for years, right? It's generally believed that Pandora left these manuscripts in trust to the other side of the family, my father said stiffly. I started thinking just how complex my family relations actually were. Ernest must have had them under lock and key for decades, for he had many offers, Augustus went on, but he couldn't evaluate their true worth because apparently they were all written in some sort of code. Then your cousin Sam, holy cow. I stood there before the fire in my skivvies, phone in hand, as my father's voice flapped on like meaningless noise in the background. Good Lord, they were in code? Sam had vanished just when his father, Ernest, died. He was out of touch for 7 years. Now he was dead. And what coincided with that hiatus? Sam's inheritance, including, perhaps, that of these manuscripts. What was Sam's profession and calling? What had he lavished his time upon teaching me ever since childhood that got me my very well-paying job? Sam was a code breaker, one of the best in the world. If Sam knew about these manuscripts of Granny's, it would have been far too hard for him to resist having a look, especially if his father wanted to determine their value. He must have seen them, perhaps broken them long before Ernest died. Of that, I was certain. So where were they now? But there was a question more crucial to me at this moment, given my own unique situation. What was in my grandmother's diaries, which I had now technically inherited, that was so dangerous it had gotten Sam killed. And that is the end of this section. Woo. Good question. Sounds intriguing. All right, you guys. Hey, quick like, I want to just remind you, if you haven't subscribed to the channel and you're enjoying this story, go ahead, subscribe, click the bell icon, and then you'll get a notification every time a new video posts. All right, you guys, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.